Hello everyone, this is the Greek Retro Geek. This is another video where we're going to be opening more bags with my recent purchases with video games. Stay with me, we're going to open at least a couple of bags today and see what's inside. I will bring the first bag of the lot and set it down to the table and grab the first item, which is a Sega Genesis game. The Genesis is the Sega Mega Drive in Europe. Warrior of Rome. This is a strategy game that came out on the Sega Genesis. This is only the cartridge. Not a very rare game or very expensive, but you know, $5 is a really good deal, even for the cart only game. Next, what we have is a classic, a real classic. This is Road Rush 2 for the Sega Genesis. One of the best kind of like action racing games on the system. There is three of these games, Road Rush 1, 2, and 3. And they are considered to be classics, and this recipe has been kind of like super original for back in the day. What I want to you to know is that the first Road Rush came out on the Sega Master System, and it was actually an amazing port for the system. Almost looks like a 16-bit, and I was always amazed at how nicely the Sega Master System could play the copy of Road Rush. So Road Rush for the Sega Genesis. Next, we have an NES game. Most of the games we are going to show today are for the NES. Super Off-Road. So this is Super Off-Road for the NES, a racing game, a top-down racing game where you can see the entire game in one screen. It's considered a classic and really playable, addicting, and it supports 4-player simultaneous action with the NES adapter. Next, we have another NES game. This is Bo Jackson's Baseball. And this is kind of like a little uncommon of the sports games. This is one of the a little more uncommon games for the NES, and I didn't have it in my collection, so I bought it. And now this is kind of like more like a filler game. But you know something, this is never a game I would basically go on eBay and pay $10-15, but locally for $5, why not? The next game, I'm holding Lethal Weapon for the SNES for $5. The cartridge is not in the best position. The label condition, I mean, the label is you know, messed up, but the price was good, and you know, I got it. This is published by Ocean Games. What we have next is Cyberspin, kind of like a futuristic racing game for the SNES. Next, we have a classic for the SNES, Mortal Kombat 3 for $5, and a beautiful copy, very clean cartridge. This is a Capcom classic, shoot 'em up, Section Z, one of the less common known, I mean, it's not an expensive game, less known games for the NES from Capcom, Section Z, in a really good shape, and I paid $5 for the game. And we have a couple more, more than a couple more actually. This is another copy of Baseball Stars for the NES. This is an SNK game, and it is an arcade port. And the next one I'm holding in my hands has been a classic and very popular in many countries. I remember that in Greece this was considered to be one of the best action RPG games, Fazanadu. Fazanadu is basically based on the Xanadu series, the old Japanese action RPG games, and this was an exclusive game for the Famicom, which came to the NES. So Fa stands for Famicom, Xanadu, and this is how this strange title comes from. Another copy of Fazanadu, really nice and clean one in the collection. Next, we have a Samurai Showdown, the SNES port, which is not the best port of the game, of course, but you know, it's really playable. Doesn't compare to the Neo Geo port, of course, but it's really playable. So yeah, Takara brought this game to the SNES. And then we have a Barker Bill's Trick Shooting. This is also kind of like a filler game, which I didn't have. It's not an expensive game or anything, but I was uh, I was actually missing this card, and now um, it's been added. We have another classic, Nintendo World Cup for the NES, big time classic, and really one of the first games that I remember when I was a kid overseas in Greece. One of the first games that I could see in the advertisements for the NES games, which were coming out with the system when it was first released. So more kind of like not very common sports games for the system, which I didn't have. This is a Michael Andretti's World GP and Formula game for the system. That was $3 with a 50% discount. And then I also bought a Airwolf based on the hit TV series of the 80s uh, from Acclaim. It's an Acclaim game. I don't think it's a very good one, but it was only $3. We have some better games coming now out of the bag. This is Xenophobe from Sunsoft. Sunsoft was one of the better developers for the NES and produced some great games. And this very nice and clean copy of Xenophobe for $3. Xenophobe came out also on older systems, even on the Atari 2600. It's crazy how the Atari 2600 could actually handle some more complicated games like Xenophobe. Even Double Dragon came out on the Atari 2600, and I know that it was a terrible port, an abysmal port. And I have a Total Recall based on the movie of the time, uh, featuring Arnold Schwarzenegger for the NES, Acclaim Entertainment, also $3. Then there's another pile in the bag with more games. This is a copy of Alpha Mission from SNK, an arcade port of a classic shoot 'em up game of the early 80s for $3. Do you remember the TV series? I think that it was also popular, American Gladiators. It was also popular in Greece, and it was a TV show that the Greek TV channels, I don't remember it was Mega or Antenna, brought it to where I used to be as a kid. So there was a game for the consoles of the time. This is American Gladiators for the NES for $4, half the price that you see is what I paid for this. And grabbing more games from the bag, another classic from Capcom, Commando. It's a really great action game and a really great port for the NES. Now this one is also a filler. It's one of these games that use the power pad, and I didn't have Dance Aerobics for the NES for $3. I don't see this cartridge very often. I think it's kind of like uncommon, but it's not expensive. I mean, this is a very good deal based on how much it goes online for, but still, I think it's a $10 or $12 game. Then we have Sacros from FCI for the NES. One of those games which are kind of like B tier games, not very good games, but nice little distractions. And this is what I'm holding now is a classic. It's a real classic from Konami. This is Blades of Steel, one of the best sports games that can be enjoyed by people who do not like sports games for the NES, brought by Konami. Konami was one of the best developers for the NES system. And there's only another couple of games in this bag. We have Solar Jetman for the NES. This is also a good game, if you haven't heard it. And then finally what I'm holding is the only Sega Genesis game from that bag, also a classic. This is Klax for the Sega Genesis. A great action puzzle game where you actually have to organize things that come down to a typewriter based on their color and basically eliminate. It's a Tetris clone. It's a Columns clone if you prefer it this way. Brought by Tengen. Clacks. This is cartridge. This is only the cartridge, and I paid $5 for this one. Now I'm going to grab another bag, a smaller one, to open together and see what's inside. Oh, what do we have here? We have many portable games for mostly for the Game Boy, and we're going to go through them a little more, you know, quickly with less details. This is Star Wars for the Game Boy for $5. This is Paperboy 2 for the Game Boy. I didn't remember that there was a port on the Game Boy for this classic game. This is Pac-Man for the Game Boy Color. It's a really nice port of the game. This is Monster Rancher Battle Card GB for the Game Boy Color. You know, the store had like more than 100 games for the Game Boy. I had to be very selective and also limit myself to games which were $9.99 or less, because this is how I could get the 50% off. Now that was a great deal. I'm holding Mortal Kombat 3 for the Game Boy. It was $5. And another one which was a great price for, how much the game goes for. Did you know that there is a port of Killer Instinct for the Game Boy? Yes, there is a port of the game, of this classic fighting game. It was $5. Getting more games from the bag. We have a Game Boy port of Marble Madness, a maddening game, and a nice clean copy of Kirby's Pinball Land. You know, it's very convenient to make pinball games with Kirby, because he's like a ball. Same thing with Sonic, he's like a ball. This is B. Damon from Atlas, from the Game Boy Advance. I thought that, Atlas usually makes kind of like interesting games, and some of the Atlas games end up being rare, so I bought it for $5. And here's an interesting one. I have NASCAR Challenge for the Game Boy Color with a manual, and this is a different cartridge. It's like really big, and because it has a kind of like a device for rambling, so you actually have rambling on the Game Boy Color, which is great. Oh, so many Game Boy games, I grabbed more. We have Terminator 2. I don't think this is a very good port, considering that it was published by LJN. You know, LJN is infamous for not the best games in the world for the 8-bit and 16-bit systems, but this is a really good game. This is Tiny Toon Adventures, a really playable and really fun and platform game for the Game Boy. Then we have Riddick Bow Boxing, a really uncommon boxing game for the Game Boy. I don't know how many of you have seen this cover. I had never seen this game out in the wild, so now it is in the collection. And neither this one, Dead Hit Scramble for $4. This is another uncommon game, but not very expensive. $4 is a very good deal though for this one. Then no Game Boy collection can be complete without a Tamagotchi copy, and this is my Tamagotchi. This is War Trees for the Game Boy, and this is another classic platform game which saw ports on other systems as well. This is Tasmania, and I think we're getting close to covering everything, and I'm grabbing some more. What we have next is a Tecmo Bowl for the Game Boy. We have Tom and Jerry Frantic Antics for the Game Boy. I think this is a platform game. We have believe it or not, there was a port of NBA Jam for the black and white Game Boy, and this is this was $4. Really nice and clean covers for all these games. Now I'm holding some GBA games. This is Crash Bandicoot: The Huge Adventure for the GBA. Really fun, stripped down, conversions of the PlayStation games. Not conversions, there are different games with different level designs, but really fun. This is a 2-in-1 Scooby-Doo game. It has two games that came out on the GBA in one cartridge for $4. And this is Spyro, the Orange Adventure for $4 on the GBA as well. And I think there's another like 10 or 15 games in this box, and I'm going to grab them all and go through them together, maybe like 10 or something. So I'm holding some more, as you can see, and what we have is we have a copy of Urban Strike for the Game Boy. We also have a copy, and I love this game. We have the sequel of Tiny Toon Adventures, which is not a very common game. It's not as fun as the first one, but it's really kind of like impressive in terms of graphics and in terms of ideas there. Then we have a copy of Yu-Gi-Oh! Dark Duel Stories for the Game Boy Color for $4. Aladdin on the Game Boy, a classic game on the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. Different games, but both great games. And also a great port for Aladdin came out on the Sega Master System, also a completely different game. This is Race Driving on the Game Boy Color. I think that this is very sluggish and slow and tedious, but quite uncommon. This is Top Gun, Guts and Glory from Konami for the Game Boy. I didn't have this one either. Frogger 2 for the Game Boy Color for $4. And this is the Pulp of Girls Battle Hymn. I think there's 3 games. I had the 2 of the 3, and now I got the third one for a complete subset. This is Rugrats Go Wild on the GBA. And this is Spider-Man on the Game Boy Color. A nice and clean copy of the game. And I only have 3 games in my hand. The first one is Mary Kate and Ashley Get a Clue. I think this is actually kind of like a puzzle game, if I remember. One of these games is actually good. It's not like a girl's game. And I have something which is not a game, but it's a planner application, Mary Kate and Ashley Pocket Planner. Have 2 UMD discs for the PSP. Have a movie, anime, Paprika. And I have a Toka Race Driver 3 Challenge for the PSP. Only the discs. And I think digging through the bag, I think I forgot to take out a couple of games, which I will do now with you. Yep, we have just another 3. So now this is another Yu-Gi-Oh game for the GBA, which I cannot really read what it says. Something Championship 2004, and that was $5. And I think this was uncommon. I haven't seen it during my game chasing. This is a Ferrari Grand Prix Challenge for the Game Boy for $5. And finally we have George Foreman's KO Boxing on the Game Gear. One of the very few Game Gear games that I ended up getting. This was $1.50, so I didn't have the cartridge. Why not? That was a long video. I hope you enjoyed. We have more bags to open, and we're going to have more videos this week, during the weekend. Thank you for watching. Do me a favor, like this video, and if you want to subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. Have a great night.